Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another video. Back with another forecast discussion today. We do have a severe threat on tap for parts of East Texas into the Mississippi River Valley. We have a slight risk, level 2 out of 5, extending from basically the Missouri Boot Heel region down through eastern Arkansas, western Mississippi, western Tennessee, the northern half of Louisiana into far east Texas with a marginal risk surrounding that. We do have a secondary target as well. A marginal risk has been put in for the area just northeast of the Wichita, Kansas area for another potential cold core severe threat up there today. We're going to talk about both areas of severe threat in this video. We'll start off with our main severe risk, the slight risk area down here from East Texas to the northeast, and then we will go into the cold core threat for Kansas in the latter half of the video. All severe hazards on tap for today. We do have a 5% tornado risk extending within that slight risk area from far east Texas up through the Mississippi River Valley into the Missouri Boot Heel with a 2% surrounding that. 2% as well for the cold core threat northeast of Wichita. Damaging winds are going to be a threat for the main slight risk area as well. And some hail, although I think the main risk area will be mostly a damaging wind and embedded tornado threat. There is some hail threat with that cold core setup in Kansas as well. So let's go ahead. I want to take you right to the radar, show you what's going on right now. We do have quite a few storms firing up across East Texas into Arkansas right now in the warm advection regime ahead of the cold front. And we've talked about warm advection, or WA, before. Warm air advection is simply the transport of warm, moist air into a region. And we have some pretty strong winds at the surface transporting that very strong Gulf, that rich Gulf moisture into the region right now. And sometimes that's enough to initiate storms in the open warm sector, and that's exactly what we're getting right now. Radar looks a little glitchy because I believe Shreveport has been down for a few minutes. But nonetheless, we do have quite a few severe storms, or non-severe storms at this point. Could ramp up in the severe threat over the coming hours, but non-severe right now. But what you can also see is this kind of fine line right in here. That is our cold front. You can see how fast it's surging. It is really surging off toward the southeast. So that is going to kind of modulate the western extent of the severe threat today. Folks to the west of this boundary, the severe risk is over for today. Folks to the east of this boundary are in the warm sector and need to be on alert for severe storms as we go into the next few hours. The SPC does have a mesoscale discussion out for this purple scalloped area here from southwest Arkansas into the northeast Texas region for this warm air advection regime. Watch percentage of watch issuance is only at 40%, so they're not sold on a watch issuance. There are some factors that may hold back the robustness of these storms in the warm sector. But again, we should have a dual threat with storms forming along the cold front and with these warm sector storms as well. So we're going to have to watch that over the coming hours as we go through the rest of the morning into the early afternoon, see how these develop across East Texas. That is going to be the short-term severe threat with this, and then the storms will become more numerous, potentially more robust as they spread off toward the northeast into Arkansas, toward the Mississippi River Delta. So now let's back out here as we usually start with this water vapor satellite imagery. And you can see a very textbook, very deep digging trough here, evident in water vapor imagery. Very strong flow, strong southwesterly flow rounding the base of this trough. This is just a beautiful looking water vapor satellite image here. And you can see as we go to our 500 millibar map, that's exactly what we're seeing here at 500 millibars. Very strong looking trough, very deep digging trough. Closed contour there at 500 millibars, some very cold air aloft, and that's what's going to initiate this potential cold core threat across East Kansas. You have strong flow rounding the base of this trough as well, and some strong defluence aloft. Again, the spreading apart of those winds in the upper portion of the atmosphere. Let's go down to 850 millibars here. Looks like we do have a tornado watch that is out now for portions of East Texas into western Louisiana, southern half of Arkansas there. So want to point that out right now. We do have a tornado watch that was just issued for the storms that are ongoing now that may increase in intensity as we go through the next few hours. So again, let's look at our low-level jet here, 850 millibars, and I am recording this about 9 a.m. Central Standard Time here. So by the time you see this, this tornado watch will have been out for a little while. Low-level jet here. We do have a nice low-level jet across East Texas, stretching into Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas as well. 35, 40 knots or so here, just about a kilometer off the surface. But this is actually progged to shift off toward the east as we go through the morning and into the afternoon. So the portion of East Texas in the severe risk is going to be experiencing decreasing low-level wind shear as we go forward with time. And just an interesting trend to note there. You can see this. We'll go through the model data in a second, but you can see that axis of the low-level jet really shifts off and increases as you go into the afternoon, and it does shift off quite a bit toward the east. So the main severe threat is going to be where that low-level jet is strongest and where it's going to shift off to, which is going to be kind of the middle to northern portions of that slight risk area. Let's go down to the surface, show you what's going on here. Our surface low, located out across kind of southwest Kansas, the Oklahoma Panhandle vicinity. Kind of an interesting setup. Our cold front's actually stretching out well to the east, well out ahead of the main surface low here. And we'll take a look at some surface data in a second. But you can see those westerly winds here at the surface. This cold front well out ahead of the main region. This surface low going to eject off toward the northeast as we go through the afternoon hours today. Our surface map, you can see exactly where that wind shift is. You can see the westerly winds out here across kind of central to north-central Texas there, shifting to southwesterly or south-southeasterly winds out in the open warm sector here. So our cold front looks to be somewhere in this vicinity right here. And we saw on radar there that it is really surging off toward the southeast. So given the strong forcing from this cold front and the fact that it's surging so much here off toward the east, storms that fire, we should have a pretty potent storm initiation along this front, but the front, as fast as it's moving, is probably going to undercut any storms that fire here. So all the storms will be what we call anafrontal. It was used in the SPC discussion yesterday. So the storms will tend to form along the front, and the front will undercut them, and they will move kind of to the backside of the front. As of such, they will be mostly elevated along that front. But again, we will have to watch the severe threat with those storms out in the open warm sector. You can see we do have a nice juicy air mass out ahead in the open warm sector. Let me go to the kind of sector here that shows us a little bit more of the warm sector. So here is our cold front right in here. Dew points in the upper 60s to low 70s out across the region, decreasing a little bit with northern extent. And the northern extent of this risk is going to kind of get pinched off, the northern extent of the warm sector, as this front really shifts off toward the east today. But very juicy moisture down here across southern Arkansas into East Texas and Louisiana there. So the richest low-level moisture, the richest low-level jet kind of overlapping in this region as we go through the next several hours. Let's go ahead and look at some soundings here. This is the Shreveport 12Z sounding. Couple things we notice right off the bat. Very deep moist layer. That moist layer extending up to just above 850 millibars, about 800 millibars or so. So very deep moisture there in the low levels. But notice we do have this pretty stout inversion that is in place today. That could be some remnants of the elevated mix layer. Again, we talk about the EML pretty much every video on this channel. It's that layer of warm, drier air, steeper lapse rates just above that moist layer that gets transported from the desert southwest or western Mexico on those kind of southwesterly mid-level winds over the moist layer in our warm sector, and that helps kind of cap storms or keep storms elevated. In this case, the storms are able to fire this early because we do have some elevated instability above this little inversion just below 700 millibars. So we do have some storms ongoing right now, but again, it's going to take a little bit of time for the ingredients to really come together for a robust severe threat with the ongoing activity because of this kind of inversion here just below 700 millibars. Now, this inversion here may stick around and maybe a little bit pesky as we go through the day today because our main forcing is going to be a little bit farther off away from this region here. Particularly, this is at Shreveport, particularly at Shreveport here. Our trough is going to kind of eject off toward the east or northeast as we go through with time. And you can see here on the RAP forecast, we'll take a look at the NAM data here in a second, the model data in a second. But notice as we go on with time, our main forcing is really up here off toward the northeast and kind of this region here. So we're the southern portion of the risk area just a little bit removed from that kind of the main forcing here with this trough. So that may allow this inversion to be a little bit pesky, especially with southern extent across the warm sector ahead of that cold front. Let's take a look at Little Rock here. Not seeing as much of that inversion here. We are north of the overall warm front. You can see that kind of near surface inversion there. Dew points only at 55, surface temperature at 56. So we are north of the warm front there, but we're not seeing those kind of warm mid-level temperatures there at Little Rock. So With northern extent, we may see a little bit better tendency for surface-based storms to take place as opposed to the southern portion of that tornado watch and that risk area, because of that little inversion there that may stick around, being a little bit farther removed from the forcing with southern extent. Now let's look at our wind profile. Very strong looking wind profile for severe storms. Very long hodograph, deep layer shear you can see 0 to 6 kilometers shear at 62 knots right there, effective shear at 53 knots. So very strong deep layer shear for rotating storms. At this point, we do have kind of a nice looking hodograph there, strong veering winds in the lowest levels of the atmosphere, a nice large looping hodograph there. But again, that low level jet is expected to shift off toward the east. So places, kind of with western extent in the risk area may see these hodographs become a little bit more muted with time, and therefore decrease the overall tornado threat as that low level jet shifts off toward the east. Up here at Little Rock, much of the same. Long looking hodographs, nice curvature there in the low levels. So the threat for severe storms is definitely there given the wind profiles in place. But again, we're going to have to watch how that instability and that inversion kind of progresses as we go through the afternoon hours today. So let's start off here with some model data. This is the NAM model, and you can see exactly what we were talking about there. The main forcing with the trough is going to be up in here across Oklahoma into Arkansas and Missouri, whereas with the southern portion of this risk area, we're just a little bit removed from the main forcing. So that may not allow that synoptic scale forcing to come in and really have an impact to lift and cool this inversion, and therefore this will kind of stick around. We'll take a look at some model soundings in a second. With northern extent, though, we are closer to that main sort of forcing for ascent there across Arkansas into the Missouri boot heel. So we should have a little bit better forcing up there. Maybe as a result, again, that cold frontal forcing should allow storms to really form a line pretty quickly given how fast it's surging. And we'll have to watch for warm sector development up there as well. But again, these warm kind of mid-level temperatures with southern extent may temper the overall robustness of those updrafts in the open warm sector, at least for now. We'll have to watch how that progresses throughout the afternoon. Let's go to 700 millibars, see if we do have any short waves down in the southern portion of the risk area to maybe help out with that erosion of the cap, and we really don't here. You can see almost a little bit of ridging there. Maybe that is convectively contaminated there a little bit, but not really a bunch of short waves moving through, or a notable short wave moving through to help initiate kind of the erosion of that cap as we go through the morning and into the afternoon hours there, especially in the southern portion of the risk area. 850 millibars here. You'll notice exactly what we were talking about with that low-level jet as well. Here's those browns and golds here is our current axis of the low-level jet as it was initialized, and you can see it moves pretty quickly off toward the east. It does increase with northern extent as well, so very strong low-level jet extending down into Louisiana, through the Mississippi River Delta there in eastern Arkansas, western Mississippi, western Tennessee. So very strong wind profiles with northern extent, but again, back down here across Texas, that low-level jet is shifting away from the region with time. So hodographs maybe closer to that front may get a little bit weaker with time. Very strong shear there, no doubt, across most of the warm sector there in kind of the northern portion of the outlook area. Surface plot here, you can see that surface low initialized here in southwest Kansas to the Oklahoma Panhandle. It's going to move off a little bit toward the northeast, or east or northeast, as we go on with time today. You can see that front is right in there. It's a little bit more noticeable in the dew point profiles here. Let me go to our southern plains sector. So here's our cold front / Pacific front right there, and just watch how fast this surges. Just really fast surging cold front by 0Z. Pretty much all of Texas is going to be out of the severe threat by 0Z or 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, as that front really shifts off toward the east very quickly. So that's going to pinch off this warm sector very quickly and really keep the storms perhaps elevated and undercut that form along that front. So let's take a sounding out here. This is going to be 18Z. You can already see that front has moved through northeast Texas. But let's take a sounding right out ahead of the front there into northeast Texas. This particular model not getting the instability very far north at all. Perhaps later on it does try to build a little bit more north. So areas with northern extent within this warm sector are going to be a little bit more instability deprived. Therefore, the robustness of those storms up there may not be as good, despite a very strong wind profile, as we saw that low-level jet increase with time. So here is a sounding from East Texas. And you'll notice here, this is a little bit contaminated. Let me take one maybe just out a little bit farther south, out away from the convective contamination there. So one thing we note right off the bat, very strong looking wind profiles for severe storms here. Very large looping hodographs, very long hodographs for severe storms. So the wind profiles definitely there for a big severe event today. But what's going to hold it back, I think, is the instability. You'll notice this kind of 700, this mid-level inversion here really kind of sticks around throughout the day. You can see that temperature kink in the temperature profile there in this model sounding really sticks around again because I think we're a little bit removed from the main forcing. Thus, it's going to be a little bit harder to lift and cool this mid-level inversion. Overall instability as well, a little bit on the skinny side. So these storms, especially with southern extent, may struggle to really be super robust as they go off toward the northeast and become more numerous with time across East Texas this morning into the afternoon. Let's take a sounding from up here in Arkansas, kind of closer to that low-level jet axis. We'll go to 21Z up here. We should see a little bit, yeah, you can just see with this particular model, the instability is just not there at all. Hodographs, though, man, look at that hodograph. Very strong veering winds in the lowest levels. Very strong low-level shear there with this hodograph. But again, the instability is just not quite there for a significant severe threat up there with northern extent. This is the HRRR run. And you can see what happens. We have those storms kind of forming more into a line along that surging cold front there, especially into Texas, up into central and southern Arkansas. Lots of showers up here to the north of that. So, the northern extent of the severe risk may get trimmed a little bit. Not sure if the northern portion of this risk is going to really materialize. They may trim this slight risk down a little bit with the next update, but we'll kind of have to wait and see with that. But you can see what happens here. Storms really form into a line quickly with some semblance of rotating elements within the line. But overall, you can see that front really surges off toward the east, and you can actually see the fine line here. And most of these storms are behind that front, so they're getting undercut thanks to the really surging nature of that front. I want to take a quick sounding on the HRRR just to see if the HRRR is backing up what the NAM is showing as far as how the instability is distributed across the region. Let's go to our 13Z HRRR. Let me zoom in here to this let's go to this sector here. And let's see, we'll go to our reflectivity here. And I want to just take a look out ahead of that line of storms. So out here across eastern Arkansas, closer to that low-level jet axis, see how the instability is? Yeah, you can see the HRRR is kind of on board with that as well. Really skinny instability despite very strong shear. So I think the northern portion, despite strong shear of this severe threat, is going to have a tough time getting any robust updrafts within that line. And then with southern extent, you do have stronger instability. However, the wind shear may be a little bit lacking, maybe a little bit of that inversion to help kind of temper the overall severe threat with the southern portion of the risk area. So lots of negative factors with this particular event. This is not going to be as potent as some of our most recent events. The HRRR is actually very gung-ho on a very unstable atmosphere here, almost 1,000 joules per kilogram of CAPE. I have a feeling that may be a little bit overdone. HRRR tends to overdo moisture just a little bit. So if we take kind of a composite of the NAM forecast sounding from out in here, and the HRRR forecast sounding, probably looking at somewhere maybe perhaps 500 joules per kilogram of CAPE that may be a little bit tempered by that mid-level inversion. So interesting evolution to this event. I don't think this is going to be a very robust severe threat, but again, we'll have to watch for some embedded tornadoes within the line, despite the perhaps elevated nature of these storms as that front kind of undercuts them, as well as some damaging winds with these storms as well. Let's shift gears here and take a look real quick at our cold core threat. We're on the heels of our cold core tornado event in southeast Iowa a couple days ago, and we're seeing another cold core threat develop here across Kansas, and we actually have this continuing into tomorrow for parts of Ohio. The cold core kind of nature to this system may produce some low top supercells and kind of a cold core setup up there as well. But we'll focus on our Kansas setup for today at this point. So let's take a look and see there. So this is our 500 millibar map. This is going to, again, this center of the low, the upper trough will move off, kind of slowly off toward the eastern northeast as we go through the day today. And this very cold air at the center of this trough is going to overspread parts of East Kansas. We have, look at this, minus 28 degrees Celsius air near the core of this cyclone. So very cold air aloft with this system. And that, again, is going to really help destabilize the atmosphere, even if the instability is kind of sandwiched in those the lowest levels of the atmosphere. Go down to 850 millibars, and again, we don't need a lot of shear for these type of events, but we may have a little bit of shear remaining, a little bit of a low-level jet there, maybe in kind of southeast Kansas remaining, just ahead of that low-level cyclone there as it moves off toward the east. And then our surface low is going to be right up, tucked underneath that 500 millibar center of the low, and there we do have a classic sort of pattern for our cold core events. If you want to learn more about cold core events, I'll put a link to the video I did on kind of a guide to cold core tornado environments up in the right corner of the screen, and I'll put it in the link in the description below as well. This is definitely a pretty classic cold core environment, and we've talked about this before. This work from Geyer and Davies 2004. There's a schematic diagram here right at the interface of where that cold front kind of meets up with the warm front, and kind of that moist axis, that tongue of moisture feeding up into the low. Right ahead of that surface low is usually your favored location for tornadoes, as we saw the other day in Iowa, and perhaps what we might see today in southeast Kansas. So let's take a look at the surface map here as well. Let me go back to the central plain sector. So we can really pinpoint where that surface low is, somewhere right in here near basically Dodge City or so. And again, that's going to move off toward the east center of, by midday, early afternoon, it'll be somewhere kind of right in here. The 500 millibar low center will be kind of somewhere in here as well, so very close proximity of those two. That's a very favorable setup for these cold core events. 50s dew points residing across much of eastern Oklahoma right now. We do have some even 60s up here into eastern Oklahoma. I do think, again, given the progressive nature of the cold front, these will shift off toward the east, and we'll just kind of have these maybe upper 40s to maybe low 50s dew points up into southeast Kansas, feeding up into that surface low. We'll take a look again at the NAM data in a second. Let's take a look at a sounding here from Norman. And you can already see that we are seeing some evidence of that instability very much sandwiched in the lowest levels of the atmosphere. This, again, is north of the warm front, but we can kind of see what's going on anyway. So kind of that instability sandwiched in the lowest levels of the atmosphere. Let's even go back here to Dodge City. And you can already see very steep lapse rates here at Dodge City, right kind of underneath that cold pocket associated with the very cold air aloft. So 500 millibar temperatures here at minus 22, minus 23. We saw some even colder air on our 500 millibar analysis. Classic looking photograph for a cold core event. A little bit of low level shear to speak of right there. Again, we are north of the front, but still a little bit of low level shear, and our classic look of that backing of the mid-level winds there that really help these cold core events become very photogenic. If we do get a tornadic supercell, the precipitation is vented away from the mesocyclone region of the storm because of these strong mid-level winds that are backing a little bit, really venting that precipitation away from any tornado that may form. So very interesting setup there. And we can see exactly what happens. Let's go back to 500 millibars here. We'll zoom back out. So again, our center of the low, and let me actually put on temperature here to show you how cold that air is at the center. So by mid-afternoon, we get that these grays are the very cold temperatures aloft, minus 24, minus 25 degrees Celsius here, overspreading central to eastern Kansas there, so very cold air aloft. As we go down to the surface, our 500 millibar low center, keep in mind where that is. And so that's where our 500 millibar low center is, and our surface low right in there. And again, that moisture kind of feeding up right into the and kind of a tongue right up into that surface low. Now we do have some semblance of showers going on. Let me go back out here to our radar. We do have some rain that's going on here across the region, and that is usually the case with these cold core environments. You'll often see, given the strong forcing from the surface low and the frontal zones, you may see some strong rainfall there in the early portion of a cold core event. But notice behind this particular batch of rain, we do have some clearing. And let me look at, let's zoom out here to our continental sector, and we can see our visible satellite imagery here. And you can really see kind of that clearing that is really working its way in behind that initial precipitation out here across Oklahoma into southwest Kansas right now, as that low really spins and wraps up across southern Kansas. So we should get some clearing out across southeast Kansas as we go through the afternoon hours behind that early batch of precipitation. Let me go back here. So again, that will move off, and let's take a look at our moisture. Now our moisture, again, is going to be a little bit on the meager side, I think, just because of the progressive nature of the cold front really pushing that kind of moisture off quickly. But you notice these red contours. These are lifted index contours, meaning we do have some unstable air up into southeast Kansas. Now dew points here only, at best maybe in the upper 40s. But with these cold core events, you really don't need very, juicy air mass like we have down here in the warm sector, like, say 70s temperatures with, upper 60s dew points. You don't need that because the thermodynamics are so strong with these cold core systems. You don't need massive sort of, juicy air masses with these cold core systems. So let's take a sounding right in here, just to the south of the Wichita area, or kind of southeast of the Wichita area. And this particular model sounding not showing a whole lot of instability. I don't know how much I buy that. I do think we will see a little bit here. Let's go and try a HER sounding out ahead. Let me go to our Central Plains sector here and see if we can get a forecast sounding out ahead of this. So this is the HER run from the latest HER run, and you can see it does try to pop up some storms really close to that surface low. The HER is a little bit farther north with the particular location of storm initiation here. Let's see where they have that moisture tongue on the HER, and you can see we do have, upper 40s to maybe some 50s dew points there. Again, the HER tends to overdo the moisture just a little bit. But let's take a sounding right out ahead of the low and see what's going on here. And yeah, you can see pretty classic cold core profile, limited low-level shear, but enough to where strong thermodynamics may really help to tilt and stretch that into the vertical. Classic backing of the mid-level winds there, venting the precipitation away from the mesocyclone region. Instability is very, very limited here. We'll have to watch how much clearing we get. The more clearing we get, the more this low-level instability will build. But you can see a little bit of fattening of that cape there in the lowest levels of that hodograph, and therefore that may be an indication of some increasing 0 to 3 kilometer cape, which again stretches that low-level spin or vorticity into the vertical there. So a little bit of a conditional threat with this cold core setup into Kansas, but it is very similar to what we saw in Iowa the other day. You don't need very juicy air to get these cold core events to produce some interesting stuff. So that's going to wrap things up here for this forecast discussion. Once again, we do have the main severe risk is going to be with this slight risk area from the Missouri boot heel down to far east Texas. Marginal risk surrounding that. All hazards on the table there, 5% tornado threat with a damaging wind threat and maybe a hail threat as well. Mostly damaging winds and a tornado threat there. And then our cold core threat up into southeast Kansas. Very conditional as well, but a brief tornado and some hail possible if low-top supercells can develop right ahead of that surface low in that cold core regime. So that's going to do it. Thanks for watching. We will see you in the next video.